This is the Digital Marketing Experts Podcast episode. No, why am I trying to sound like a radio announcer? Experts on the Wire, episode 39. Rob Bucci. Hey everyone, so if you're familiar with featured snippets, these are those answer boxes that show up at the top of Google search results sometimes. These have been growing. As of July 2016, 15% of desktop searches and 17% of mobile searches result in a so-called featured snippet at the top. They're even showing up for high-cost searches like in the financial industry, e-commerce, and education. In short, featured snippets have become a way to jump up above all the other results right to, quote, position number one in Google. Today, my guest is Rob Bucci, founder of Stat, an enterprise SERP analytics tool. He recently spoke at MozCon in September, and Stat did a massive study all about featured snippets, which we will, of course, link to in the show notes. In this interview with Rob, you'll learn some of the top words that commonly trigger these featured snippets, a white hat featured snippet loophole that might not be available forever, and how to get featured snippets for your site to jump above all the other results right to position number one. And once again, you can, of course, sign up for the email list if you go to evolvingseo.com, go to any page where you see the podcast, and there's a MailChimp form on the right. I will email you directly the show notes and all the links, all the info for every episode right when it posts, so you won't miss a show and you'll have all the resources right there in your inbox. You can write back to me. I usually do try to respond to everyone. So I hope you enjoy episode 39 of Experts on the Wire with Rob Bucci. Hey everyone, I am super excited to have Rob Bucci on the line from Stat. Rob, how are you today?
I'm well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. I'm very, very excited to talk about featured snippets and especially, and I'm going a little off the cuff here, but did you see Google's announcement yesterday with Google Home?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, why don't we just start right there? And I'm going a little impromptu here, but I was really just excited to talk to somebody about your thoughts on. Okay, to set it up for the listeners, Google is essentially using featured snippets to answer people's questions with voice at the home. So you're at home and you're having a discussion with your uncle, and he disagrees on, who the star of Batman was, and you say, "Okay, Google, who is the actor in Batman?" And Google will answer you using a featured snippet answer. What are your thoughts on that, Rob?
Well, I mean, all along we've been looking at featured snippets and saying this isn't like other events that Google takes, like, for example, authorship, where it might disappear in a few months or even a year, because we've seen featured snippets as a cornerstone to their voice search needs. It's like a cornerstone strategy in the sense that when people speak a search query, the best experience is to have the answer spoken back at them. And we've always thought that this was really important to voice search on mobile devices. And I'll admit, like, seeing it in the home, I was like, of course, I didn't anticipate, but naturally it makes perfect sense. So it really goes a long way to sort of underscoring the importance of this trend and how it's not really going anywhere. Google is arranging a lot of resources around this initiative.
What are your thoughts on the fact that there's not even a website involved? There's not even an opportunity for somebody to click on anything.
Yeah, I mean, so that element of the voice search back and forth experience is still unresolved for me. I feel like they can get away with providing concise answers for queries like your example. It's a knowledge query. Who was the actor in Batman? But when it comes to a recipe, let's say, how do I make gazpacho? And if I'm in my kitchen and my hands are covered in food or flour or something, and I don't want to pull up my phone and I'm speaking to my device, how can they possibly speak back the entire recipe in a way that's a good experience for me? So that element of the interaction is still unresolved. I do think that in the future we'll see some sort of innovation around those queries being spoken and flashed to a screen of some kind. And that will result in opportunities for SEOs to drive traffic. But the fact of the matter is that looking at the mobile and the desktop data, we're seeing very similar occurrence of featured snippets, meaning that, yes, it's a mobile-first experience. The strategies are aligned to that, but there's this huge opportunity on the desktop as well, and that's where you're going to get a lot of the clicks.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that insight. So let me back up a step now. I purposely just kind of started things full speed. I like to just jump right in sometimes, but let's back up a couple quick steps. We're going to get back to featured snippets for all the listeners, but can you quickly just tell us a little bit in 90 to 120 seconds about STAT?
Sure, absolutely. So STAT, we're a Vancouver, Canada-based company. We help people measure the visibility of their websites in the search engines. We help them understand everything that's going on the SERP. You would traditionally call that rank tracking. We like to call it SERP analytics because we look at more than just your ranking. Ostensibly, we want to help people at very high volumes understand what's going on. And so we allow people to think really big. Like, instead of tracking 100 keywords, go out and track 10,000 keywords. And we do it in a way that's affordable.
Awesome. What's the value of tracking 10,000 keywords?
Absolutely. The value is in the segmentation. Like, if I look at 10,000 keywords and I say, hey, my average ranking is 17, that's great. It means I lifted a lot of data in order to get that number. But the true value is how you slice and dice that into smaller segments and then benchmark those segments against each other. And the key part of what we're building and what our product does is allow you to draw meaning and insight out of those large volumes of data. So we're not just going to like spray you with a fire hose of data. We actually want you to be able to separate, let's say, 10,000 keywords into 5 product categories and then mirror those into mobile versus desktop and then track those in 3 major geolocations like, Boston, New York, and Philadelphia, let's say. So that's where you really get meaning out of the volume.
Awesome. And what's your quick background, Rob? How did you get into STAT? Were you doing SEO to begin with, or how did you get into that?
Yeah, I graduated with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Sculpture and had no idea how to make money. So I started working in marketing, and I got asked these questions about, hey, how do we rank number 1 for terms like Vancouver condo? I was working for a real estate company, and that got me into SEO. And at the same time, I was like, I'm not really enjoying this gig, but I think I'd like to be independent. So I started to learn how to write code and built an SEO product. And the product was designed to help people answer those questions about, hey, where do we rank for things like Vancouver condo? So I kind of naturally found myself veering in this direction.
Oh, wow. So I missed if you said, do you have a background in software?
No, I have a background in sculpture.
Yeah. I caught the sculpture part because actually, and we need to chat after, my dad is a professional sculptor.
You're kidding me.
Yeah,
I love it.
He does classical sculpture out of clay. And I mean, the whole thing, I don't want to bore the listeners with that. And I'll send you his websites after.
That's great.
If anyone's
I love that.
curious, robertshoresculptor.com is his website. But anyways, yeah, so you don't have a background in software. So how did that tie into creating a software product, essentially?
Yeah, a little bit of naivete. Like, I didn't know what was impossible or what I could do or couldn't do, but was determined. And so just working really hard and teaching yourself how to write code, and at the same time trying to make the thing that you're learning how to do make money, naturally found me in this position where I had a product and it was doing pretty well. And I realized at one point where I'm like, I can start a business. This is like business worthy. And that's what I did. I made my first hire, and just kind of ever since then, we've reinvested what we've earned, and we've never taken outside investment. So we're completely private and bootstrapped, and we're 30 people now, and it's been a pretty good ride, I have to say.
And what year was that first hire that you made?
2011.
2011. Okay. And how would you, if at all, compare yourself to, let's say, a company like Moz that everyone's familiar with, or even advanced web ranking? Where does STAT fit in with that?
Sure. We position STAT and we build STAT for the experts. So we're not so much like Moz is a really fantastic tool, but they're really good at taking people who are perhaps have a little less expertise, or their needs are not as sophisticated because they're a smaller, medium-sized business. Where we position STAT for the needs of the enterprise and for those veteran SEOs who don't really need to be told why to use the software, but rather they need the data to help them get the insight that they need to answer the questions that they need to answer to do their jobs. And so that's the difference in positioning. We're all about scale, we're all about high volume, and we're all about helping those experts understand exactly what's going on in their ecosystem. And the companies we're dealing with are the larger companies that have millions of web pages and hundreds of thousands of potential queries that people might use to drive traffic to their site. So the challenge of staying on top of that is not insignificant.
Yeah, so it sounds like you fit into a nice place in the market. I don't think not many other companies come to mind that deal with that enterprise kind of scale level. maybe Conductor. I don't know if you place yourself in the same level as what they do. I know they're much broader than just search.
Yeah.
But
we focus on being like a specialist tool. We do SERPs, and we do that the best in the world, I think. And we haven't let ourselves get distracted by doing all these other things. And that's partly because we're a private small company. We're not trying to be everything to everyone.
Excellent. So one last quick question about Stat. How big is the company now? How many people?
We're 30 people.
30 people. Wow, that's great. So I've been trying to do better as an interviewer, kind of doing the follow-ups and digging into some of the details a little bit. But now I want to move things to the featured snippet. So why at Stat did you, I mean, obviously you said you do SERP analytics. So what's so important about featured snippets that caused you to do such a large white paper study? I think you analyzed millions of SERPs. Can you break that down a little bit? And like, why is this so important now?
Sure. Okay. So philosophically, research in general, not just featured snippets, is really important to us because we feel like there's a vast echo chamber in the industry where there's a paucity of original ideas and research, and a lot of people echoing what they see and regurgitating it. So when we decided to embark on our marketing program, we said, how can we create true value that people will not find anywhere else? And we realized we have this expertise around analysis and statistics, as well as our ability to collect data, that puts us in a really good position to do unique original research. So the goal my team has is to do one very deep research project per quarter. And that was our first one, featured snippets. And I hope to hell that we'll get the other one out in the next quarter and it'll be great, just as great, right? But the reason we picked featured snippets was because hopefully with this Google event that happened just yesterday and the announcement, it's kind of self-evident now. I mean, they're just a crucial part of where SEO is going. And I'm really keen on them because the opportunity they present to SEOs is one of, hey, like instead of trying to like compete for a position 1, 2, or 3, like why not try to skip them all and jump right to position 0? I mean, I love that. That doesn't exist anywhere else in the SEO industry. So we were naturally attracted to doing some research there.
Any little teaser on the next big study you're doing?
No, sorry, I can't tell you.
When are you hoping to get that out the door so people can look for that?
I believe that our target is by the end of the year, but some stuff is in flux, unfortunately, and we'll definitely keep the world posted via our social, like GetStat on Twitter or StatRob if you want to follow me. But I hope by the end of the year we'll have something out.
Okay, great. Everyone can keep an eye on that and follow GetStat. So yeah, let's jump a little bit more into the featured snippets now. So you mentioned why you see these as such a big opportunity, and I see that as well. What's your feeling on it? Or did the study involve any aspect to, are people clicking on them? Is this sending people traffic to their sites, or is it all about the eyeballs and impressions?
Well, I mean, for us and the way we approach our work is we really focus on the SERPs. So the next step, and it's natural that everyone's curious about this, is like how much traffic is coming through them. What is the CTR for them? I would love to do that study, but we didn't do that.
CTR would be
click-through rate. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just
so like,
for some
what is
listeners that might not catch that? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't want to descend into jargon. The click-through rate. So people are asking, what is the click-through rate there? We only look at the search engine result page, the SERP. And so we're not actually looking at the traffic that's coming through there. Although I have seen some studies that the traffic is good and people can manipulate the traffic they get from a featured snippet by doing things like, for example, if you have a recipe that has 3 steps, maybe it's like really simple, like how to make toast. And it's 3 steps. If you were to add in the 4th or a 5th step so that the snippet is truncated, so that Google can't display the full content on that snippet, that's going to increase your click-through rate. People are going to go to your site more. And we've seen other studies where the conversion rates on page is higher because people are seeing you in the featured snippet position, and Google is essentially going, hey, this is the best content in the entire world to answer the question you're asking, and that confers a great sense of authority onto the site that has that content. And what we're seeing that translate into is an increase in on-page conversion rates.
So you're saying actually sites are seeing better conversion rates when they're appearing in snippets?
When the traffic comes from the snippet, yes.
Very interesting. So you spoke at MozCon. And so if anybody wants to, I think you can now get Rob's slides from MozCon or from moz.com. That's where I downloaded them the other day. So if anybody wants to kind of have a visual to follow along, because I know some of this can be a little kind of visual intensive because we're describing kind of search results. And I'll link to this in my show notes as well, if you don't mind me doing that, Rob.
No, not at all.
The listeners can kind of follow along, and we'll also link to the white papers that Stat did. But let's take it kind of back to the beginning of this MozCon presentation. So you start by kind of breaking down, I think, the different types of snippets that people can get. So what are the types of featured snippets out there?
Sure. There are 3 core different types of featured snippet. One is a paragraph snippet, and that's perhaps the most common that we see. The next one is a table snippet, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's data formatted into a table. And the third one is a list snippet, and that is either a bulleted or a numbered list.
Excellent. So you also, in your study, you talk a little bit about how often these are showing up. Do you have any stats or numbers around that?
Absolutely, yeah. So we see paragraph snippets, the most commonly appearing type of snippet. When we refreshed the data in January and July, and so we were drawing trends from it. I'll focus, just for the sake of time, just on the July data. So in July, we saw paragraphs 63% of the time. We saw lists 19% of the time and tables 16% of the time. That is actually a lot higher for lists and tables than it was in January. So Google's starting to bias themselves more towards that user experience. The reason that we think paragraphs are the most common is because Google has given themselves the gargantuan task of providing featured snippet answers for myriad different queries people might ask. And the vast majority of the content on the internet is free-form text, is not formatted into lists or tables. So Google has to do what it can with these paragraphs. But the interesting trend in our research, and hopefully I'm not getting too far ahead of you, is that we feel like Google would rather show lists and tables for certain query types. And there's a clear bias towards certain snippet formats for certain types of queries. And we saw some big opportunities for SEOs in that knowledge, with that knowledge.
And so those percentages are percentages of what? The amount of keywords that you used in the study?
Oh, yeah, great question. So let's back up then. We queried 1 million SERPs. And so when I say 63%, I mean not 63% of 1 million, but 63% of the SERPs that had snippets, right? So if we back it up a little bit more, I'll tell you, we queried 1 million SERPs, and we found that 15% of those had snippets on them, right? So 15% of 1 million has the snippets on them, and then 63% of those snippets were paragraphs.
Got it. So 63% of all the ones that did return snippets were paragraphs. So
you got it.
Yeah, essentially that's saying that 2/3 of snippet results right now are paragraph type. But so are you sort of insinuating that it would be advantageous for sites to think about trying to influence table snippet results as well? Because Google might be struggling to find those at the moment?
Absolutely. If you think about what Google's interested in is getting people to the answer they want as quickly as possible, as efficiently as possible, with as little friction as possible. So if we help Google craft the best user experiences for the user, we're helping Google and we're helping the user, and in so doing, we're helping ourselves. So if we look at a query space where we see that, let's just say it's buyer's guides or like product reviews. And if we look at this query space, we see that predominantly Google is showing table snippets. Yet we find some outliers where it's still a paragraph. Yet it definitely is a similar query. It belongs in that query space. We can tell that Google would rather this be a table because they're saying to the users, or they're saying to us, just looking at the data, the best user experience is tables when people are doing these kinds of queries. So the advice we make to the audience and to the industry is look for those trends in the formatting of the snippet type. And that's Google telling you what format they prefer for the best user experience. And so when you find outliers, those are weak snippets that you can perhaps take over by optimizing your content to be tables, let's say.
Makes sense. So I want to talk about what I'm sure everyone's dying to know is how they can get these snippets and how they can identify the opportunities. Before we do that, does this apply, would you say, to any type of website? Like if you're in any industry, the auto industry or childcare or food, or like, can anybody be trying to go out and get snippets, or is there anybody that this would not apply to?
If you were to ask me in January, I'd have a different answer than July. That's the interesting thing. So in January, we found that the word best, it was like we had the word best 63,000 times in our data set, and not once did it ever trigger a featured snippet, ever. And that was really interesting. It was like best was like a stop word for snippet occurrence. And we have the same thing with places packs. If you see a places pack on the SERP, you will never see a snippet on the same SERP. In both July and January data refreshes, that maintained the same. 0% of SERPs with places results have snippets on them. But the word best, when we refreshed it in July, all of a sudden is triggering snippets. So if you had asked me in January, hey, I have a product review site, can I get snippets? I would have said no. But you asked me in July, and I'll say, oh yeah, now you got a big opportunity. So the way I'm seeing it trend is Google is making this opportunity for featured snippets roll out across all industries, all verticals, almost all query types. Well, so I guess the short answer to your question is anyone can go after them.
Yeah, because I remember when they first came out, I was sitting there thinking like, okay, this is just going to be maybe a little fad, or like it'll appear on 2% of search results. But now you're saying like this is actually getting bigger and bigger and bigger than maybe any of us really realized to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just in 6 months from January to July, I mean, the trend there in January, out of 1 million SERPs, 9% had snippets. In July, it's 15% had snippets. And by the way, for mobile in July, it's 17%.
Wow. Incredible. So anybody listening right now, no matter if you're a blogger, if you have a food website, really anything, it sounds like Rob's saying you should pay attention because you could possibly benefit in a big way from snippets. So let's talk about what everyone is probably dying to know. How do they get featured snippets? Are there some things that you saw in your research that can help people get those?
Sure. Now, I'm going to let people down a little bit because I don't have any silver bullets for you. But the research that we did was focused on observation of the SERPs. We did a little bit of digging into on-site properties. We looked at like link profiles. We looked at social authority. We even looked at like Fleisch-Kincaid readability scores and like topic density and stuff like that. And to be honest, we didn't see a big enough correlation. Anything that I would be confident in basing any advice on. And it's probably because even at 1 million keywords, that's a relatively small data set in the grand scheme of the scale of the internet. Now, I will say, based on observation and on some research that the other people have done, that the kind of things that make you eligible to get featured snippets are good engagement with your content. Like you don't want to have a high bouncer. People are clicking on your site, bouncing out, and then clicking on the next site below you, for example. So you're answering the right question, and people are engaging with your content. The second thing is topical authority. I feel like your site's perception from Google as being a topical authority in any given topic makes it more likely that you're going to be awarded with snippets. Those two things, I think, are leading indicators of whether or not you're going to have the option or the opportunity to get a snippet. Beyond that, I unfortunately don't have a lot more advice to offer in how you are eligible for snippets. I definitely can make advice on how to optimize for snippets, but the underlying like authority level that you need to have a certain authority to pass that threshold, I can't really advise on that.
So what you're saying there is those two elements, the good user experience, the user signals, and the topical relevance get you in the door to have the potential to have featured snippets. So I want to make sure people caught that. So, and just to translate a little, so what it sounds like you're saying is A, users can't be landing on your site, hating it, and going back to the search results, what Rand calls pogo sticking.
Yeah.
Or I don't know if that's his term, but that's where I first heard it. And then secondly, you're saying that you need topical relevance around the topic, right? So what about the case of a site like entrepreneur.com, right? They have no specific topic necessarily, or sites like you mentioned Wikipedia has, what was it, 15% of all featured snippet results?
Yeah, they have a massive amount, yeah.
Yeah, so is it the case that if your site is high enough in authority and popularity that you don't need as much of that topical authority?
There certainly is some argument to be made for that, and it's really dangerous for me to go out and make broad sweeping claims about what I don't know enough about or have enough data to base my opinions on. But I will say, in the case of Wikipedia, like it's an outlier. Like Google has a major love for Wikipedia because they have a high degree of confidence that the content, even and the imagery on Wikipedia, is relevant to a certain topic because they believe in Wikipedia's crowdsourced editorial model, right? And that works really well. So I would never ever compare myself to Wikipedia. It's just a strange outlier. Now, if we take the concept or the site of entrepreneur.com, they might not have, how do I put this? They might not have topical authority on a given array of topics, but they do have authority as a knowledge resource on general themes or subjects. So having not actually dug deep into looking at entrepreneur.com's snippets that they are awarded, my guess would be that they're largely on things that are like knowledge queries around the size of companies or leaders at companies or, their financial reporting and things like that, which is an area of topical authority for entrepreneur.com, even though it's a vast media website.
Awesome. I like the fact that you're you're willing to say that we don't have the data to back this up, because I think what you said at the very beginning is there's a lot of people out there in the echo chamber regurgitating a lot of the same information.
Yeah.
And it's very tempting to do that. So what I want to talk about now is, okay, so you have the good user metrics, the topical authority. What can people be thinking about doing in the piece of content itself that you've seen that might correlate to getting a featured snippet?
Sure. First of all, if you are in a space where you're going and today's a new day, I'm going to go out and I'm going to get featured snippets. The first thing you should look at is like the what and the how queries. What does fleek mean? I have no idea. What, how do frogs croak? How does global warming happen? Things like this, these are ripe fodder for people to go after getting their own featured snippets. So that's like the very first approach is to think about your keywords that are driving the featured snippets and think about modeling out a query space around that keyword. The people also ask boxes that you see in the search engine result page are super valuable for this. And we see a very strong correlation between featured snippets and the PAA box. And if you put in a query and you see a PAA box appear, note down all those other queries because Google is saying those are related in the same query universe or the same query space. And so if you can't win a featured snippet for one of them, maybe you can for the other ones. And you can keep going down that rabbit hole until you build up this query space. At that point, start thinking about how you're going to make it easy for Google to extract the right content from your page to go in that featured snippet. If you have a very long, deep knowledge type article, you could consider surfacing key elements from that article in sort of like a TLDR or even like a table of contents if you wanted to go after a list snippet, surfacing them in a way that Google can extract them with a high degree of confidence that they know that what they're pulling out is relevant to the query and is correct. That's why tables and lists are very, very helpful because sometimes we've seen Google want to show a list so badly that they've tried to extract it out of freeform text, like a bunch of divs, and it never works well. But you know that Google wants to give that user experience. So if you were to take that content, put it in a list for them, they're going to be more confident in pulling it out and therefore be more biased towards pulling your content than somebody else's.
Excellent. So you mentioned starting with IDing the keywords, right? So you mentioned how and what. Are there any other words that you see commonly trigger these featured snippets? So like let's say I have a company that has a blog and I want to write some content that might trigger this, right? What sort of keywords or topics or things can I look for in that research process to sort of align this with maybe content that might trigger a snippet?
Sure. It widely depends on vertical or on what we call the query space or query type. I'll give you a list of 5 query types where we see a greater than 50% occurrence of snippets. That is financial terms, mathematic terms, terms around requirements, course requirements, things like that, health terms, you see a lot of WebMD stuff in there, and DIY process terms. Those are a lot of like the how do I wax my car, how do I build a boat, how do I build a patio, things like that. Never rely on a snippet to tell you how to build a patio. It's a bad idea. So that you have these query spaces where you see a lot of snippets very often appearing, and then you have query spaces where you don't see snippets very often. And those are things like local terms. Now, I can put in like, who is Seattle Mariners mascot? And that's a featured snippet. That's a local term. And that's normally where you get snippets, but you won't see them for Seattle Pizza Place, for example. Info help terms, factual terms, shopping terms. We don't see a lot of snippets for those things.
Interesting. So, and I'm leading you a little bit here, is there a tool you can recommend for people to find question-oriented keywords?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, like Moz Keyword Explorer is really, really awesome at this, I think. For the keyword research part, they've built a great tool that allows you to like dig into and stem out different like question keywords. And you can even use search operators in that to get really advanced. I like it because it's friendly to the experts as well as to the mid-market. Beyond that, though, you're going to want to take that information and track it in some robust way that lets you track it at scale and monitor the different types of snippets. And as far as I know, and this is a bit of a plug, I apologize, but as far as I know, Stat is the only product in the market right now that allows people to differ between different snippet types. And so we can certainly help with that. I'm also more than happy to point people in another direction on Twitter if they want to ask.
Excellent. And there's also a tool called Answer the Public that I think you
mentioned. So cool.
Yeah. And tell us a little bit about that tool.
Okay, Answer the Public is cool because they've taken ostensibly it's like Google Suggest Scraper, and they've just like pumped it full of steroids and made it amazing. Like the user experience of that website is really fluid and something that I'm quite enamored by. Like I wish we could bring that to Stat. It's a very good tool for you to be able to put in a core idea and pivot on it in different ways, to look at it in terms of perhaps similar words or perhaps like similar sentence structure. Answer the Public. Definitely check it out. Very cool.
Excellent. So that's great. So we talked a little bit about, just to refresh a little for the listeners, we talked a little bit about the types of feature snippets, the types of keywords that may trigger those. And you mentioned briefly what to do to the content itself, but let's dive a little bit more into that and first talk about paragraph snippets. So is Google essentially looking for, okay, the query is the question, and then how do they find, I've always wondered this and I haven't studied a lot myself, how do they find the answer to that question in the content? Are they looking at the top? Are they looking for markup? Are they looking for certain patterns in the language? Do you have a sense for like how, when somebody says, how old is Steve Carell, and they know how are they finding that?
Okay, so factual knowledge, like how old is Steve Carell, is distinctly different from a featured snippet because that's part of the knowledge graph. That's
Yep.
No, but it's a pretty common misconception. Like they're not featured snippets; they're knowledge cards, even though they look very, very similar. Mm-hmm. If I say like how far away is the moon, well, that's not going to change. At least I hope it doesn't change, because that would be bad. And the same thing with Steve Carell's age, right? So you can calculate that based on the birth date. So those things are outside of that. But what you're asking is a good question, which is, you have a free-form body of content. How do they know which paragraph or which sentences to pull out? They're definitely not relying on things that can be gamed or gamed by people like SEOs. So they're not really relying on schema a lot. They're looking at the semantic content of the text, like what is the meaning of the text, and they're looking for the proximity of key terms to other terms that help them disambiguate and understand what a sentence means. This is seriously advanced stuff, and the scale in which Google is doing it is very, very impressive. There are open source softwares out there that kind of get you part of the way to doing this. There's things like NLTK, the Natural Language Toolkit, which has been around for years. It's based on Berkeley DB, and then you have all sorts of APIs like the OpenCalais API, Alchemy API that was just bought by IBM Watson, that allow you to also do similar types of analysis, but Google's doing it on a whole nother level. And the fact that they're able to look at the word blue and understand if I mean like my mood or the sky, or I'm talking about a painting, that's very, very impressive. And it seems like a narrow challenge, but it has so many applications.
Yeah, like I was just randomly going to Google. I was typing, how do you? And it suggested, how do you get pink eye? No, I was not looking this up recently. It's just what was suggested. And they have a what I believe is, if I'm getting the definition correctly now, is a paragraph featured snippet answer. And
that's correct.
So, and they've bolded conjunctivitis and pink eye, and then the word eye again. But they do such a good job at so this comes from AAO.org. Did AAO.org do anything to get this, or they've just kind of answered this question really well in their content?
Yeah, I think that they've answered it really well in their content. They haven't done anything specific with like on-site structure or schema. I mean, they definitely do, if you look at that page, have like a full paragraph that is self-contained that comes under the header of what is conjunctivitis. So Google is looking at this and going, okay, we know that this statement below the header, what is conjunctivitis, is a definition statement. And then we're looking for, like they're taking the word get in the query and synonymizing that for other words that might mean get, like acquire, get the contagious form of. And so they're looking at that paragraph and they're giving it like a confidence score. How well does this paragraph answer that question? There's a bunch of analysis that goes into that, like looking at the first sentence and saying, okay, does this sentence define the item that is being queried about? And it does. It says conjunctivitis can be quite contagious. So ostensibly, this is a bunch of very advanced analysis, natural language analysis that Google's doing, and is not heavily reliant on anything that AAO.org might have done on site specifically to optimize that one section to be extracted.
Should people think of their content almost like an FAQ, like this format here? It's a question, and then they literally answer that question. So like the key term that triggers the featured snippet is the question itself?
I really love that format. I don't think that you want to like contort yourself into anything unnatural that's not a good user experience, though, and keep that in mind. Like just focus on good user experience. But the format of having like a header or an H1 of some kind that defines the subject of the content below, and then the content is concise and relates directly to what that header is talking about is very good. And you can bring this in many different ways. You can bring it in an FAQ format. You can do like a TLDR format. Table of contents work really well. Absolutely.
Excellent. Yeah. So I'm bouncing around looking at a few articles you have. There's another one that you posted, I think, on Distilled. Oh no, you didn't post that. Somebody else wrote an article about 3 ways to find answer box opportunities, and I'll link to it in the show notes. Example they give is black flowers, and then Google returns not only the definition, the answer to that, but also an image in the featured snippet as well. Can you talk a little bit about that? I've seen Google doing this recently. Why are they putting an image in the featured snippet, and is there something we can do to get our image included as well?
Yeah, I have some statistics there for you. We're seeing images decline in featured snippets between January and July. Paragraph snippets still have the most. 28% of all paragraph snippets had an image in January. That went down to 20% in July. For lists in January, it was 26% of all lists had an image. In July, that went down to 6%. So a very precipitous drop off. The advice that we offer people for how to go get images is a little bit funky, and that is try to be like Wikipedia. And I already know I gave the advice earlier, don't compare yourself to Wikipedia. But the fact is that there's one image on that page that Google knows with a high degree of confidence is related to the content of that page, and they're more likely to get pulled out into an image for that reason. So if you can do anything to give Google a high degree of confidence that the image that they're pulling out is the right image, then you're going to have a likelier chance of being pulled into a featured snippet. It's inherently risky for Google to start pulling out images because they're harder to analyze than text. They're more computationally intensive to analyze than text. So, and frankly, they also have this Google universal result of images that they would use for queries where an image was the best answer, right? Yep. If I type in snowboarding pics, I'm going to get an image box. So the long and short of the advice that I have to offer people is don't really go after it. I don't think like it's really worth your time. I think if you're in a space where your site naturally lends itself to images, like if you're a stock image website, okay, maybe that makes sense. But otherwise, I think it's a bit of a fool's errand because we are seeing it trend downwards in popularity anyways.
Excellent. Let's talk a little bit about these table results here. I'm seeing these, and you link to in the MozCon slides. These are showing up in insurance queries, in salary queries, in, I believe, credit card.
Yeah, and subjective queries.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about those. Do you actually have to mark up your content with HTML table markup?
Yeah, you do, which is weird. It's kind of a throwback. People are like, we just got over tables, now we're bringing them back. But consider this in its early growing phase where it's a bit uncomfortable maybe to use tables, but Google will get better at recognizing other types of tables over time, I'm sure. But right now, the advice we offer is give Google a high degree of confidence that what they're pulling out is the right thing to pull out. So putting it in a table helps them have that high degree of confidence, especially if they want to show a table for a certain query space. Like for subjective words that people would use for like reviews, comparison, rankings of products and things like that, tables are just like blowing up everywhere. They're the most common format for that query type. And so if I was trying to optimize a snippet for something that was like rankings of products, like rankings of what the best iPhones were over the past 7 years or whatever it is, I would go with a table, right? Because I know that Google wants to show that there. And I would use table tags on my HTML content. That's interesting because I've seen just regular content rank really well with tables. Never mind the featured snippet, but I've seen content that's that type of search, best miles reward credit card is the one I'm looking at. Yeah. That I've seen that rank well just in the organic results.
when the content is structured visually in a table format.
Yeah.
What I was going to ask was, so what are your thoughts on, this might get a little more opinion oriented, but best miles reward credit card, this is like a very high value search query, isn't it? Isn't this like this? People looking for credit cards. Isn't there a lot of money to be made for a site ranking for this?
Absolutely.
And so what are your thoughts on that? Like, because back to when this first came out, I was initially expecting this to be only informational searches. Now a lot of these seem to be moving more towards these kind of converting, money to be made oriented searches. So what are your thoughts around that? Is Google going to just keep moving in that direction as well?
Okay, so opinion time. But I feel like if you think about it as an odometer, they went from 0 to 100 and they're going to find their way back towards the middle at some point, because it's not necessarily the case that featured snippets are the best experience for some of these queries. And especially if we anchor featured snippets as something that exists to drive a voice search mobile first strategy. Best miles reward credit card, a table snippet that comes up, how do you speak that back to the user in a voice search that's in any kind of reasonable, easy to consume way? And humans aren't exactly adept at hearing information and cataloging it and storing it for future retrieval. We're better at reading and doing that. So I feel like, we're seeing this explosion of snippets in a whole variety of spaces. I am curious to see if maybe some of these spaces where they just don't find a lot of value to the users, they dry up a little bit. And I just don't know. We'll certainly want to refresh the data at some point next year.
Excellent. So in other words, what you're saying is Google will often test things and push things over the limit and then bring it back. Yeah. So lastly, the bullet results, these list results here, is it similar to tables? Should people be marking up with bullets?
Okay, bullets are a little bit funny because, use OLs, use ULs. Great. You can definitely use those because Google will know with a high degree of certainty that that's a list. And if they want to show a list, for example, if it's instructions, steps, directions, lists are perfect. But we have seen a lot of sites get away with using divs, and Google has pulled out those divs and put them into lists. And if you think about how that works, because divs are these nested objects, and so when you collapse up a nested object, you're left with the high-level items in a list, right? Mm-hmm. And so for them analyzing the HTML and looking at divs and collapsing up the divs until they get a list of items, they can then say, okay, that's a list, and we're going to pull that out and put that into a list on the snippet. And when they do that, they usually just provide a bullet. They don't number it or anything like that.
Yeah, there's a really cool screenshot for people that dig up your MozCon slides for the online accredited Christian colleges result, where you actually show the Chrome developer analysis of the content. And is this what you're referring to here? Is the div that's in this content here?
Exactly. But if you look at this one, so the readers are going to have to pull this up. But the query is online accredited Christian colleges, and the snippet URL is from the domain affordablecollegesonline.org. And when you go there, you see that this is all structured with divs, and there are actually 4 metrics here. There's the name of the university, the score, the online cost per credit, and its religious affiliation. Google would love to pull all of this out into a table, but because it's in divs, they can't do that with any authority. They don't do that with any confidence, So what they instead default to is collapsing up all the divs, picking the very first item, which is the name of the university, and putting that into a list. But my recommendation to all the MozCon attendees was, this is a weak snippet. If you were to take this information and put it into a table, Google would prefer to have that and therefore grab it from your site instead of this site.
Yeah, you have a nice tweetable tip here. It says you can steal weak snippets, use the format Google really wants to see for a query. So you're talking about taking a page and the information the site already has, but just reformatting it into a more clear format.
Yeah, I'm certainly not advocating ripping off people's content by any means, but I am saying that if you're in that space and you have similar content, you can optimize your content to be better than their content.
Excellent. Yeah. So there was one last question, and Rob, also jump in as we're getting towards the end here. Is there anything I'm missing? Anything that you think is important that the listener should know about? Because there's a lot of stuff in your content, and I'm going to link to it again in the show notes, the white papers and everything. But is there any key element that I might be missing or not asking?
One thing that I think is just a really valuable piece of advice for all of your listeners is to think about the gold rush in non-United States markets. We know that Google wants to roll out featured snippets to other markets. It's coming to Canada where I am, and we're happy to see it there. And it's in the UK, and it's moving into Spain and other places. And what you might notice is if you take a query and you go to google.com and you query it and you see a featured snippet, take that same query and go to another market, let's say it's the UK or Canada, and query it, and you might not see a featured snippet. And that might be because Google has not yet found the right geographically relevant content for that market, but this is a big opportunity for you. And I would suggest that anyone for whom it's a natural fit, for example, if they have content in the US that's optimized and appearing in a snippet, try to get that snippet in Canada as well. It might be that you have to change your content to make it relevant to a Canadian audience, but small price to pay for getting a lot more traffic and visibility in different markets. So I think that's a big opportunity people haven't really clicked into yet.
That is a really good tip. And I know right now I'm going to use that as one of my teasers in the intro. That's excellent. Cool. And lastly, I'm going to link to sort of a sub piece of content that's best words that generate featured snippets that you have on Stat. And I just want to quickly mention this to the listeners. So you basically break things down into different categories: financial, mathematic, and time, etc. But then what you give, if I'm correct with this, is the percentage of featured snippets that show up for each word. So like the word salary, are you saying that salary is 76% of all the financial featured snippets?
No, what we're saying there is that when we saw the word salary, 76% of the time, that was a SERP that had a snippet on it. So that word belonged to a query that created a snippet.
Interesting.
Right? Yeah.
So you're saying that all search queries, 2 words, 5 words, 6 words, 7 words, 76.84% of the ones that had the word salary trigger a snippet?
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this can be another element of your keyword research process. You can go to the list here on getstat.com, and you can see that the word cost triggers a snippet 56.65% of the time. And then maybe you can tie that into some content that you already have or that you could. So where my mind is going, if you go to Google Search Console, Search Analytics, maybe you can associate the word average, which returns a snippet 77.71% of times. Maybe you're already ranking a piece of content with the word average in it, but not getting the snippet. Is that sort of a strategic way that you've thought of this as well?
Yeah, I mean, we want people to look at their whole query space. So like speaking specifically of Stat, we want people to take, let's say, 10,000 or 100,000 keywords, load them in there, look at a benchmark of all their rankings and their visibility, and most importantly, what SERPs have snippets on them that they rank for and what SERPs have snippets on them that they don't rank for. Of the ones that they don't rank for, look for the theme in the format. And then of those, find the ones that don't have the format that confers to the broader theme. Pick those out and say, those are your weak snippet targets. You don't rank for them. You know that the format is not optimal for what Google wants. Go after those. And so that's the general process. Having the knowledge of the words that trigger snippets most often is definitely useful in your keyword research, though. Absolutely. They become really good seed words for you to start mapping out your query universe around.
Excellent. That's another great tip there. So all this snippet stuff has really got me excited to go back and look for opportunities for clients and myself as well. One last quick question about the snippet. So I see that if you type your name into Google, Rob Bucci, it triggers a snippet. So did you do this on purpose, and what did you do to get that?
No, it was a happy accident.
Really?
And it's funny because I don't get it in Canada, which is ironic because I'm Canadian. But apparently in google.com it does work. Where I can go and I can type in, who is Rob Bucci, and boom, I am officially an entity. I didn't do anything for that. That just happened. And I think, that happens because I have a presence on the internet. I have a, Twitter, and I have my own blog, and I have a LinkedIn. And then my name is often linked to getstat.com on other sites. And so it was a happy little accident.
That's great. So a couple other quick questions here to break away from snippets, just things I was interested in, and the listeners would be as well, I hope anyways, I know you're in a space where your tool is geared towards those more advanced enterprise level sort of clients. So if somebody's sitting here and maybe they're working in a marketing department at a company, or they're the CEO of a company, like how can they determine when they might need enterprise SEO versus boutique SEO versus in-house SEO? Like, do you have any advice for people that are trying to figure out the best way to fulfill their SEO needs?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like enterprise is a really abused word. Ostensibly, when we think of enterprise SEO, we're thinking of very complicated SEO with a lot of key stakeholders, perhaps geographically decentralized, and large teams. So, like I say, enterprise is one of those weird words that has come to mean almost nothing as people have abused it so much. But truly, if you have a website that has hundreds of thousands to millions of pages, you're probably doing enterprise SEO. If you have a business that is located in multiple different countries and therefore you have to have different SEO strategies and perhaps even teams in different locations, you're doing enterprise SEO. If you have a smaller, perhaps in more narrow vertical that you operate in, but it's all SEO, like that's your major channel, and therefore you have a big team, I would also classify that as enterprise SEO. We actually wrote, this gets asked a lot, so we actually wrote a blog post on this on the Get Stat blog. The title is called The Skinny on Enterprise SEO and Big Data, and it probably does a lot better job of defining it than I could here. So I'd recommend anyone read it if they really want to understand that.
Great. We'll link to it in the show notes. So, Rob, you also, at least when we stalked you on LinkedIn, we saw that you speak French and German.
Yeah, just a little though. I mean, not enough enough to embarrass myself, I'd say. Yeah.
And first of all, I guess so you're in Canada, so is that where the French comes in?
Yeah, I mean, that's just reading cereal boxes as a kid. I actually, I went to university in Montreal. I lived there for 6 years, and I picked up the French there.
Excellent. And then where'd the German come in?
When I was first building Stat, I was traveling a lot, and I lived in Munich for just under a year. I rented a small little office in like a former methadone clinic. It was a really weird situation, but that's where I picked up German, and that's where I did most of the programming on our data collection system actually at that time. So, and I fell in love with Bavaria and Germany in general. Yeah.
Well, let me stop you right there. You rented an office in a methadone clinic.
Yes.
Yeah. What is the story to that?
It was a former methadone clinic, so it was like an abandoned building that they couldn't find any tenants in, and I happened to be walking down the street and saw a guy there, and he owned the building, and we got to talking, and I said I need an office because I was in this tiny little like hostel type environment. I couldn't work there. And so we just struck a deal where I was the only person. It was like a 7-story building, and it was like a former clinic, and it was probably haunted. It was really interesting. Yeah. But I just had this front room where I had my desk, and that's where I worked all the time. Yeah.
You don't hear that every day. That's funny.
No.
So has, to your kind of, as you say, sort of limited knowledge of French and German and, knowing enough to be dangerous sort of thing, has that helped with anything in terms of mindset, in terms of SEO, keywords, business, entrepreneurship? Is there any sort of connection for you with that?
I wouldn't draw a direct connection to knowledge of language, but being worldly and having like diverse experiences with different cultures and different types of people really helps you understand how to communicate with people, and better yet, understand what motivates people and how you can communicate with them in a way that's resonant with their personality type or who they are. So that is a key skill for any entrepreneur, especially one who is bootstrapping, where you are doing the programming, you're doing the support, and you're doing the sales. In order for you to sell anything, you really have to know how to talk to people. And we're a global business. I remember in the early days when I still did sales myself, I'd have a morning phone call with Hong Kong and an evening phone call with Australia. And having to talk and have what I'd call like micro moments where you have to be charming and helpful with people, you really want to be able to understand how to talk to people. So my experiences of traveling the world a lot when I was younger really, I think, are a great benefit to that.
It is interesting. And often one of the most empathetic situations that I can be in is seeing somebody that's not tech oriented at all and from a different walk of life use their phone to search Google or look over their shoulder to see the 69-year-old guy that, just goes to Internet Explorer and types in the search bar, has no idea what search engine he or she is even using. I often find that can give me a sense of empathy for doing keyword research, for thinking about UX and all that kind of stuff that, in our sort of tech bubble or SEO bubble, we don't get that all the time. And so,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I like the answer to that. Lastly, you had a really cool, and I'll share the tweet that you shared of this picture from MozCon. You had a big coloring wall.
Oh, yeah.
So what's the story behind that?
Okay, so much like we don't want to contribute to an echo chamber, that's because we're a bit of a quirky company. You know, we kind of want to feel like, well, how can we rewrite the book on what it means to be an enterprise software company and do that in a really human way? So that comes through in our marketing and our research, but it also comes through in our marketing at our events. We don't want to give away stuff that goes to a landfill. So we don't give away swag that has no value and probably just ends up in the trash. We also want to do things that we feel are authentic and fun. And so the types of what we call like an event happening at a conference are usually about bringing people together, creativity, having fun, being expressive, and doing so under the brand. So, you know, like coloring is this really hot thing right now. A lot of people are turning to coloring just to help with the anxiety, for example, and adult coloring books are this huge market. It's really interesting.
I've seen
so we
that,
thought, yeah, and you see them everywhere. And I don't have the patience, but like people are into it. So more power to them. But what we did was we thought, well, let's create pencil crayons because they're totally biodegradable and recyclable. And then let's do this big coloring wall and let's encourage people to come up and get their coloring on. And in the end, it was like a Space Invaders type image that everyone colored an individual, like I think it was like a 1-inch square panel, maybe a 3-inch square panel. And then we put them all together and the mosaic made this really fun Space Invaders type image.
And was that like an actual booth that you paid money for? Like, you know how people like have their booths with like, you know, like you said, the swag and everything, or is that because you were speaking there, or how did that come about at MozCon?
Yeah, so it's different for different conferences. But specifically speaking of MozCon, the editorial process for selecting the speaker is divorced from the process of selecting and inviting people to come sponsor. So it was a very happy coincidence that I was asked to come speak, and we were also asked to come be a partner. We love our friends at Moz, and we get along really well with them. We trade a lot of notes. So we've been happy to come the last 2 years and hopefully even next year to be partners, but that's completely different from being invited to speak. And indeed, when you're invited to come be a partner at MozCon, you do have to foot some of the bill in putting that booth together. But it's not the kind of thing where you can just say, I'll pay you, I want to come. They have to invite you.
That's really cool. And, you know, I'm a Moz associate and obviously familiar with the brand and everything. And, I love hearing about the things that you're doing at Stat in terms of not having things that go into a landfill. And also MozCon, you know, I love the things they do aligned to their values, the code of conduct, you know, all these things that they're really getting a diverse set of speakers. And I think that anybody considering a conference should definitely consider MozCon for, you know, like, and it goes back to your answer about the foreign languages, like the diverse amount of experiences and backgrounds that they're going to get when they attend an event like that. Absolutely.
I will say that beyond just being a remarkable company in terms of their ethos and their value system, I've learned a lot from watching how a big company can conduct itself in a really human, authentic sort of way. And I owe like a great debt of gratitude to being able to learn lessons from watching what they do, and especially how transparent they are about talking about how things worked or didn't work. So I've been the beneficiary of a lot of knowledge just from them being part of the industry and being who they are. So that's great.
Absolutely agree. Rob, this has been a great interview. I've learned a lot about featured snippets, about your background with foreign languages, and I think, and I believe there's a lot of things that the listeners can take and apply and be inspired by. So it's been a pleasure having you on the show. I'm gonna hit stop here, but as soon as I hit stop, I'm going to give you a few links of my dad's sculpture websites. And
that's great.
If you want to share any of your work, if you have any photos or anything, I'd love to see that too. But for all the listeners out there, we'll see everyone next time on Experts on the Wire. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.